back around 1992. I was in high school. At that time, I was a sophomore, and unlike most of my friends in school, I didn't work the typical high school jobs like McDonald's, Taco Bell, some retail jobs in the mall, or work at the local grocery store. I was very good with my hands and worked in jobs like construction, demolition, flooring, and auto mechanics. All of my contacts, I worked under the table as I started working on some of these jobs at 14. It was beneficial for both of us, as I was only called in when needed, and I was the guy willing to only work evenings and weekends. One of my contacts worked on remodeling projects in restaurants, bars, retail shops, and other typical commercial projects that we could only work on after hours. Like I said, that worked out for both of us because I went to school and would sometimes work after school or on weekends. For this one contact, it wasn't uncommon for him to leave me alone at a site and have a list of things for me to do alone, mostly demolition work. I did this while the other crew was doing the installation or remodeling work. I was the kid, but I had their respect because I did what I was supposed to do and did the work of a man without complaining. I got paid well, and in one night I could make more than my friends did working all week at McDonald's. In this one instance, I got a call from the guy I worked for, and he said he had a project for me, and if I could work the following Saturday, I said yeah, sure. He said to be sure to bring food and lots to drink, as there was nothing nearby. I used to have a small cooler and would fill it with drinks like Coke, Gatorade, or whatever, plus chips and a couple sandwiches. Back then, I could eat a whole pizza by myself and burn it all off. He picked me up that Saturday morning, as I didn't have a car or license yet, so he would pick me up and drive me to sites for work and leave me alone there. I rarely worked with his other crews, as they were the more skilled laborers. I was just the tear-out kid. Here's the part that was my major downfall in this story. I didn't pay attention to where we were going. I was too busy talking to him, and I think we were talking about cars. You see, at the time, my goal was to save up enough money to buy an old muscle car and rebuild it. It took a long time to arrive at the site. As we drove up, it was in the middle of nowhere. Now, you may not think California has places like this, but back in the early 1990s, out in the Mojave Desert, yes, there were big plots of land and homes more than a few city blocks apart. I knew we left the highway and went down a few other two-lane highways for a long distance. I remember he asked me about my drinks, and he pulled out a brand new jug of water that he had in his truck that looked like it had been there a while, and told me to take it with me just in case. He said that the water to the house I would be working at was off. As we pull up to the property, he is in a hurry to drop off tools and get to another work site. So I hurry up and help him with things like breaker bars, shovels, a pry bar, a hammer, a broom, several big trash bins, and a small tool bag that I often had with me. He tells me that he will be back to pick me up at about 5 or 6 p.m., as there is no electricity at this site either. Plus, it should only take me until then to do what I needed to do. That was always his way of saying, I'm only paying you until this time, so you better get everything done by then. It was never too outrageous, and we always had a good understanding of time and tasks. He drove away, and I'm at his property all alone. I walk into the house. It's mostly empty. My job was to remove all remaining furniture, contents, and appliances. Remove all the flooring, gut the kitchen and bathrooms, and remove all of the wood paneling. This project was going to be like what we now call a flip. They were going to fix it up and sell it. Almost immediately, I got kind of spooked by the place. It was very odd. Mind you, I'm used to being on sites alone working all night. This was the daytime on a Saturday and bright outside. However, the house was old, dark, musty, and kind of cool inside. The kind of cool that gives you goosebumps. To add to the spook factor of the house, let me describe what I remember about it. Imagine walking back in time to the 1960s or earlier with dark green carpet that looked like matted down broccoli, pine wood everywhere that had a darker stain to it, wood paneling that wasn't the kind used in the 1980s sheet paneling but actual board paneling tongued and grooved, old window, Curtains that all looked like someone's grandma made, an avocado green sink, stovetop, and oven, and the stuff that was left behind like old furniture, and a closet full of old stuffed animals that looked to be about 30 years old. The style of this house was like an old western ranch, as there were wagon wheels inside and outside the house. I had an old battery-powered radio, but could only get a few stations and was just happy for the noise. I started removing all the junk from the house, and as I normally do on a project, if there wasn't a dumpster on site, I made a trash pile. I tore up all the flooring next. To my delight, everything seemed to come up with ease, and it was rip, cut, and toss. I took a big demo hammer to the kitchen and tore it apart in less than an hour. I ended up using that big jug of water that my boss had given me to wash my hands and face periodically. But by late noon, as most who know the desert know, the dryness also starts to take moisture from you, especially if you are working in it. So by late afternoon, I was down to my last drink, and I had already eaten everything I brought. No worries, I thought the guys should be here in a couple hours to pick me up. As the time gets closer for them to arrive, I am all done with my tasks. I even swept the entire place, and it's now ready for the rehab crew to get to work making this place look modern. The time of year I was out here wasn't a typical hot desert day. But you know, in the desert, as soon as the sun goes down, it starts to cool rapidly. I had a flannel shirt, but that wasn't enough, and it was starting to get dark. This was the time before cell phones were common, and there was no electricity, water, or phone service to the house. I climbed up to get on top of the roof of the house to get a better look to see if I could see something in the distance. And what looked like miles down, I saw a smaller road that this dirt road led to, and a few homes, but those homes were all in the dark. My first thought was to hike down to a neighbor's house and ask them to use the phone. At the nearest house, no one was home, and this home also looked abandoned. If you remember, the early 1990s were the start of a decline in the economy and a recession, so it wasn't uncommon for a lot of foreclosed homes to be on the market. I worked on a lot of those at that time. I started to think about my options as darkness fast approached. One was to stay at the house until morning. Two was to hike with what little water I had a few miles in the dark Mojave night. And three was to wait until early morning and hike out of there to some sort of civilization. It also suddenly occurred to me that no one knew where I was except my boss. I don't know if he told anyone else where I was, and certainly my family wouldn't miss me until maybe Sunday night, but I didn't even tell them I was going to work there. They knew me and how much I would work to save up for my car, so they never worried about me not coming home. As full darkness was all around me, it was amazing. Looking out at the night sky, and lucky for me, the moon was bright. I didn't have a flashlight or any way to make a fire. Even though I tried, I was going to make a small bonfire out of broken up construction debris as the temperature started to fall, probably down to the low 40s. My only option was to go back inside the creepy, empty house, which somehow seemed even creepier sitting alone in the dark. At about 8 p.m., the batteries on my radio, which was my only source of light and noise, started to die. I grabbed an old wooden chair and sat in the living room of this house, facing the door. I'm starting to hear wind, odd noises that I assume are animals in the distance, and what sounds like leaves cracking under my feet. I'm starting to shiver from the cold, so I set off to try to start a fire in the fireplace. Imagine Tom Hanks in Castaway trying to start a fire. At least this is keeping me aware of my situation. Sitting in this living room next to the fireplace, the house seems even darker than it should have. Mind you, in the daytime, the inside seemed dark, so with only the moonlight, I was pretty much sitting in complete darkness. My mind starts to play tricks on me. I am seeing shadows moving outside and inside the house. I am also starting to hear someone talking in whispers or something. I get up from my chair and yell out hello, and just as I do, I hear something fall from the other side of the house. I run over to the door and go outside again. At least in the moonlight, I can see better, but off in the distance, I hear noises and see movement, but can't make it out. I have my pile of tools by the edge of the house, ready for when my boss picks me up. So I run over there and grab Big Daddy. It was my heavy pry bar that I used in the demo. I was ready to defend myself against who or what was out there. I have to keep moving because my undershirt and flannel shirt weren't enough to keep me warm. The wind was also starting to pick up, and as far as I could see, there were no lights around me. I didn't want to try to make it up on the house again out of fear of falling in the dark, but I got up on top of the gate just to try and gain a little bit of altitude to see if I saw some house lights nearby or car lights. My mind went to the stories that circled around at the time about how people would come up to the Mojave desert and bury bodies, how there were Satanist groups out here, and how people would go missing for no reason out here. Every noise had me on edge, and every shadow had my heart pounding. I knew no one was in that house, but I swear I would hear noises from inside. I huddled up on the front porch looking out the living room window, expecting to see someone at any moment. By around 11 p.m., I look at my watch, thinking this is going to be a long night, as all this stuff has only happened since it got dark. I don't know how I'm going to make it another 6 hours till daybreak. I start thinking that the moment it gets to be daybreak, like the moment light starts to appear on the horizon, I'm going to take the little water I have left and walk east. I knew that going east. I would eventually make it somewhere. The dirt road I was on led to a paved road. Closer to midnight, I am wide awake. My eyes are fixed on the dirt road, thinking that any time now a car would come down it, and maybe they could call for help for me. I remember casually turning to look back into the house, as all this time I kept hearing noises, but telling myself maybe it was a rat or some animal. I see the shadow of a person move from the kitchen to down the hall. I jumped up from sitting down and was like, that is not an animal. That is a human. I start backing my way out of the porch towards the pile, trip over debris, and fall to the ground. I get up, but fall again. It was like something pushed me down, or my imagination. But all of a sudden, these bright lights are coming closer to me as I am lying on the ground. I jump up, and it's my boss. He is looking at me like, what the heck are you doing? I was just so glad to see him. I was just so glad or anything. I just asked him what happened. He said that he was sorry, but he thought the other crew was coming to get me, and they thought that he was coming. So no one actually came. He said it wasn't until later in the evening that he asked the other crew leader about how far along I got, that he said I didn't go get him. Well, it took him almost 2 hours from where they were working to come get me. He felt really bad and told me he was going to pay me for the entire time I was out there. He also grabbed a can of Coke from his cooler and asked me if I was thirsty, and I drank that all in one gulp. Once we got back toward civilization, he went through a fast food drive-thru, and I ate like I had never eaten before. As he was driving me home, I asked him about the house. I told him how creepy it was, and he said he didn't have any information on the house, only what we were supposed to do. After that, I made sure to always keep extra batteries, a flashlight, and double the amount of liquid. I was about 11 when this happened. My older cousin Daniel, about 13, and I were playing hide and seek outside in my grandmother's yard. She owned a large farm in Tennessee, just over 1,000 acres, and I grew up there my entire life, as did Daniel, so it was nothing for us to wander off and play in areas that probably weren't very safe for the average kid. But we knew the property like the back of our hand. It just so happened that the day before this happened, a lot of trees were cut down to make room for a new mobile home by the roadside that she intended to rent out for extra income. Daniel and I naturally gravitated toward this new, unfamiliar landscape to play in because it was something new to explore. All of the trees had been stripped of their branches, placed in logging trucks, and hauled off. The branches, however, were all piled in a tangled mess about 50 feet wide and 15 feet tall. They were packed so densely that you couldn't see through them from one side to the other. It was about the half-hour mark when it was my turn to find Daniel. that I began to suspect that he was hiding in the woods deeper than our stated rules allowed. I remember calling his name for several minutes and hearing nothing but a quiet giggle coming from the woods. I was in the newly cut clearing, looking into the woods and getting more upset by the minute. Finally, I announced as loudly as I could that if he wasn't going to play fairly, then I was going in to get a glass of tea and watch television with Grandma. I started back up the hill towards the house. It was at the moment I was walking past the brush pile, basically centered beside it, that I heard an unfamiliar voice say, "You gave up quickly." I stopped. I called out, "Daniel." It didn't sound like Daniel, but the voice responded, "Yes, I am Daniel. I am inside of the limbs." I looked at the brush pile and didn't see anyone. Again, I heard the odd voice call out, "If you do not see me, then you have not found me, and I will have won the game." I stepped closer and yelled out to the voice, "Why are you talking so funny?" The voice replied, "I am inside of all of the limbs. Look inside and you will see me, Daniel." Something felt really strange about the way this guy was talking, but 11-year-old me just rationalized it, thinking maybe his voice sounds different behind the shrubbery, and he sounds like he's talking funny because his voice sounds different. I stepped up to the edge of the brush pile and pulled the branches apart to look inside, and there was Daniel. His head was turned toward the top of the hill, but his body was facing me. I yelled out, "I caught you!" His head shifted toward me, and he had the single most disgusting smile I've ever seen to this very day. Imagine if someone has the absolute worst of intentions, and they're trying to hide behind a fake innocent smile to gain your trust, but they can't help their glee at the thought that they may have fooled you. That's the best way I can describe the smile. I was so shocked by this wicked facial expression on my cousin's face that I froze in place. The hairs on my neck and arms all rose, and I could suddenly feel my blood running through my body like the temperature had dropped inside my veins. I stammered through my words. "How did you get in there?" He responded, "I fell into the inside of the limbs. Cousin, I will need you to give me help, or I will continue to be trapped." I didn't notice this time how oddly he phrased his sentences, and it only occurred to me afterward that his lips were not moving when he spoke. He never changed his face from the twisted, unnerving smile. I didn't immediately notice any of these things because I was too distracted by the large stick that was plunged deeply into the side of his neck. I noticed in that moment that he had a slow, steady trickling stream of blood flowing from the $half-dollar size stick in his neck and down across his right shoulder and down his chest. That was enough to jolt my feet awake. And before my brain realized I was trying to run, I was already halfway up the hill to my grandmother's house. When I burst through the door to my grandmother's living room, Daniel was curled up in a ball on the couch and crying hysterically. My grandmother was sitting beside him, trying her best to get him to explain what was wrong. But all he would say was that there was a little boy in the woods who tagged him when he was hiding, and he thought it wasn't really me. He wouldn't say anything else. I was crying and shaken up by this point, and I told my grandmother what I had seen. She made both of us some lunch and then called my uncle to come pick Daniel up. I stayed at my grandmother's house that night, and I bet she asked me what happened 100 times. She asked so many questions that it was as if she were committing them to memory. I remember being relieved that she believed me, but at the same time, I just wanted her to tell me it was all in my imagination and help me forget about it. The next day, my grandmother set the brush pile on fire, and I watched for hours from the safety of the living room window as it slowly deteriorated into a pile of ash and embers. My cousin never told me what really happened to him that day. He refuses to talk about it. I will say this though, he wouldn't talk to me for a year and a half after that day. We were so close when we were little. But that event, whatever the hell it was, drove a wedge between us that changed our relationship forever. Most of the neighbors on our street are friendly. We look out for each other. We text, chat, and say hello when we see one another, etc. It's a sweet feeling of community. In the past, there had only been one household that wasn't interested in being friendly with any of us. An elderly woman, mid-70s, we'll call her Maud, and her son, mid-50s, we'll call him Don. We'd, my partner and I, attempt to wave and say hello, only to be met with cold stares. Once, my dog managed to slip out of his collar and run through their yard while Maud was out getting the mail. The glare I received from her while trying to catch the dog left me with a feeling that was hard to shake. You know that unexpected gut punch feeling when you become the object of a stranger's misery and hatred? Anyway, we learned quickly to stay out of her way. We barely ever saw Dawn. The blinds were always closed tight. They rarely left the house, and no one ever visited. I last saw either of them at the beginning of August 2021. Dawn was getting the mail while wearing blue latex gloves. I thought it was weird. In early October, one of our other neighbors reached out to ask if we had seen Maud or Dawn recently. We had not. Suddenly, we were all too aware that their grass was over 3 feet tall. The mailbox was so full that it couldn't close anymore, and papers were spilling out into the street. Obviously, a welfare check was called. The neighbor who had put herself in charge of directly communicating with the police called shortly after the check and told us to sit down. Maud and Dawn were both dead and had been dead for 6 to 8 weeks. It appeared to be a murder-suicide, with the assumption being that he killed her. I paced the rest of the day in front of my living room windows, watching the crime scene van pull up and the officers in and out of the front door, taking breaks to somberly chat in the front yard. And then, after a few hours, out came the body bags. The smell was something I had never experienced before and will never forget. In the following weeks, I thought of how many times I had walked by that house with my son and dog, while 2 bodies sat rotting. I stayed up for hours a few nights, trying to find out anything I could. Nothing. No news stories, no crime reports. Nothing. So I dug into Maud's history. All I could find was that she had been buried in a field north of town dedicated to the unclaimed. I kept a close watch on the house and researched the legal proceedings it would go through since there was no kin. Looking at that house had always felt cold and sad before, but now it felt dark too, haunted. I became obsessed with Maud's story without any way of getting answers. Her house just stares back at me, blankly, every single day. Back in the spring, my young son and I were out catching fireflies. We would stand still, waiting for one to blink, and run in that direction. It took us up and down the street multiple times. I know this is such a small, silly detail, but that night I stared into Maud's yard for minutes at a time, waiting to see a firefly, and I swear not a single firefly blinked over there. I became so bothered by it that I stared longer, sure that if I just stared long enough, I would see one, but nothing. Complete stillness and darkness. I told my husband that I hoped someone would buy the property and knock the house down. No one has any business living there now. Today, around a year after they died, the doors were opened, and people I hadn't seen before were in and out, carrying bag after bag of what looked like junk. I texted a neighbor and asked for information. He said the house and all of its belongings had been collectively sold and bought at an auction 2 weeks ago. These were the new owners, probably getting ready to flip the house. I typically don't shove myself into situations, but I had just spent way too much time thinking about Maud, wondering who she was, why she was so angry, imagining what a strange life she and her son had been living, and what their last moments were like. I knew I'd regret it forever if I didn't ask them what it was like inside, so I did, and they invited me in. One step into the front door, and more puzzle pieces fell into place. This was a hoarder's home. There was barely anywhere to put my feet. Stacks on stacks of old fine china, pots and pans. Vintage books and records. Knickknacks in countless boxes, filled with God knows what, from the floor to the ceiling. The woman who had led me inside said, "The mattress where it happened is still here. Do you want to see it?" Slightly afraid that she'd think I was completely demented, but far more curious, I said that of course I wanted to see it. She led me to a bedroom through piles and leaning stacks of junk. She walked into a cramped small bedroom with a twin-size bed and pulled the blanket back. If you've seen what decomposition stains look like, then you can imagine what I saw. After processing, I asked, "So this is where Maud was found?" I think they were both in here. I'm trying to piece it all together. I haven't even started in the other corner bedroom, but I'm hoping it'll give me some answers. I'll be here organizing and sorting over the next few days. You're welcome to join me if you'd like. I told her that I would love nothing more. So after all of these months, I am excited to have a chance to get some answers to everything I've been wondering. To get a sense of who Maud was. To possibly find a way to honor what seems to have been a very sad life. To maybe get some clues into why her son murdered her. Her son, who I found out shortly after seeing the house, was a deeply troubled sex offender who was charged by the FBI for child pornography and soliciting a minor in 2014, and to hopefully do it without any bad energy attaching itself to me. I do keep wondering, why? If this was a murder-suicide, did the police not do a deeper investigation? Is it because there were no kin to care? Anyone have insight